It was a freezing night in November 1979 when a young man named Mark was driving home from a late shift in suburban Chicago. The roads were slick with icy rain, and the only light came from his high beams reflecting off the wet pavement. As he rounded a bend, he saw a girl standing on the side of the road, shivering in a pale dress. She couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. Mark slowed down, rolled down the window, and asked if she needed a ride. She nodded silently and slipped into the back seat, her white dress damp against the vinyl. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Home," she whispered, giving him an address not far away. Mark tried making small talk, but she hardly responded. She just stared out the window, looking pale and sad. When they finally reached the address, a small house with a worn fence, Mark turned to tell her they had arrived. The back seat was empty. Confused, he got out and knocked on the door. An older woman answered. Mark explained what had happened, and the woman's expression changed from curiosity to sorrow. "You picked up my daughter," she said quietly. "But you couldn't have. She died in a car accident on Archer Avenue 20 years ago tonight." Mark swore the girl had been real, that he'd felt the wet fabric of her dress against the seat. The mother only nodded, as if she'd heard this before. "You're not the first," she said. "Sometimes she still tries to come home." Local legend now calls her Resurrection Mary, one of the most famous hitchhiker ghosts in America. Dozens of drivers over the years have told the same story: the pale girl in white, the ride to the same house, and her vanishing just before they arrived. Whether Mark truly gave a ghost a ride that night, or whether fear and fatigue tricked his mind, no one can say. But people still report seeing her on Archer Avenue, wandering, waiting, and looking for a way home. In 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus thought they had found their dream home in Westfield, New Jersey, a beautiful 6-bedroom house on a quiet street, perfect for raising their 3 kids. They had barely begun moving in when the first letter arrived. The envelope was handwritten, no return address. Inside was a typed note addressed to the new owner. "My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s. My father watched in the 1960s. Now it is my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls? I am the Watcher." The writer claimed to be responsible for keeping watch over the property for generations, and, disturbingly, the letter referenced the Broaddus children by nickname and birth order. "I see you have brought me young blood," the letter read. "Will the young blood play in the basement? If they do, I won't be able to hear them scream." Derek and Maria were horrified. They contacted police, but nothing came of the investigation. A few days later, another letter arrived. "Have they found what is in the walls yet? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I will know as soon as you move in." The letters grew more sinister. The writer claimed to be waiting for the day when the house cries for the past, and signed each note simply, "The Watcher." The Broaddus family never moved in. They were too afraid to risk their children's safety. They tried to sell the house, but word of the letters had spread and no one wanted it. To this day, no one knows who wrote the letters. Neighbors were investigated, DNA samples were taken, but nothing conclusive was ever found. The identity of the Watcher, and what they wanted, remains a mystery. The house still stands in Westfield, a seemingly ordinary home on a quiet suburban street. But the story lingers. Somewhere, perhaps even still watching, is the person who sent those letters, waiting for the next family to bring young blood to the house. In the 1970s, identical twins June and Jennifer Gibbons were born in Barbados but raised in Wales. From an early age, their parents noticed something strange. The girls rarely spoke to anyone else. They developed a private language only they could understand, communicating in whispers, sometimes in perfect unison. Teachers described them as brilliant but unreachable, staring blankly when addressed. As they grew older, the twins withdrew further, They refused to speak to family members, writing in diaries instead. Those diaries later revealed an unsettling truth. Each sister felt possessed by the other, as if only one of them was meant to exist. Jennifer once wrote, "We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes. We destroy one another. If I die, there will be life. If I stay alive, there will be death." By their late teens, the twin turned to petty crime: arson, shoplifting, vandalism. A judge sentenced them to Broadmoor, a notorious high-security psychiatric hospital in England, where they were confined for over a decade. Staff at Broadmoor reported eerie behavior. The girls moved in synchronized patterns, mirrored each other's gestures, and often sat for hours in silence, as if communicating telepathically. Doctors noticed something more disturbing. When separated, each twin became catatonic, unable to function. Together, they were animated but always locked in a silent power struggle. Jennifer appeared to dominate, and June seemed terrified of her sister. Then, in 1993, after years of treatment, doctors decided to transfer the twins to a lower security clinic. On the bus ride there, Jennifer quietly laid her head on June's shoulder and said, "At long last, we're out." Moments later, she collapsed. By the time they arrived, she was dead. Cause of death: sudden inflammation of the heart. No drugs, no poison, no clear medical reason. June later told journalists that Jennifer had decided it was her time to die. She claimed they had made a pact. Only one of them could truly live. After Jennifer's death, June slowly began to speak to others, integrate into society, and live a relatively normal life, something she had never been able to do while her sister was alive. To this day, no one can explain Jennifer's sudden death. Doctors found nothing physically wrong with her. Theories range from an undetected virus to something darker, that the bond between the twins was so powerful, Jennifer somehow willed herself to die to release June. June still lives in Wales, quiet but functional, forever carrying the shadow of the pact she and her sister made. Their story remains one of the most unsettling cases in psychiatric history, a terrifying reminder of how the human mind and the bonds it creates can blur the line between life and death.
In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers set off on a trek through the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was meticulous, documenting every detail of their journey. But the group never returned. Weeks later, rescuers discovered their camp, and what they found remains one of the most chilling mysteries in history. The hikers' tent had been cut open from the inside, slashed as if they were trying to escape in a panic. Their belongings, boots, coats, food, were left behind. Bare footprints trailed away in the snow, some only in socks, others completely barefoot, leading into the darkness. The bodies were found scattered across the mountainside. 2 were by a fire pit, barefoot and in underwear as though they had fled in terror. 3 more were discovered several hundred meters away, positioned as if they had been crawling back toward the tent. But it was the last 4 bodies, found months later in a ravine, that horrified investigators. 1 had a crushed skull, 2 had shattered ribs, 1 woman's eyes were missing, and her tongue had been torn out. Strangely, there were no external wounds to match the internal damage, as if the force had come from within. Forensic examiners compared the trauma to that of a car crash. Even stranger, the hikers' clothes showed traces of radiation. The Soviet authorities quickly sealed the case, declaring the deaths caused by a vague, compelling natural force. Families were left with unanswered questions. Rumors swirled: a secret military weapons test, a KGB cover-up, an avalanche, even an encounter with something unknown in the mountains. Locals whispered of a cursed place, haunted by spirits they called the Mountain of the Dead. Over the years, the Dyatlov Pass incident has become one of the most studied unsolved mysteries in the world. Scientists have offered explanations from katabatic winds to hypothermia-induced hysteria, but none account for all the evidence. The radiation, the missing eyes and tongue, the immense internal injuries. The mountain still holds its secrets. Hikers who pass through speak of an oppressive silence, as if the place itself remembers. And at the base of the pass, there stands a memorial with 9 faces etched in stone, forever watching the frozen wilderness where their final night ended in terror. No one knows exactly what drove those 9 hikers from their tent into the snow, but whatever it was, it left behind a mystery that refuses to rest, an unsolved horror carved into the ice of Dyatlov Pass.
In the winter of 1922, deep in the Bavarian countryside of Germany, a small farmstead called Hinterkaifeck stood isolated among dark woods. It was home to Andreas and Cecilia Gruber, their daughter Victoria, her 2 young children, and their maid. The family kept to themselves, but neighbors described them as respectable, if a bit stern. Then, in March, something strange began happening. The maid abruptly quit, claiming the house was haunted. She told friends she heard footsteps in the attic at night, doors creaking open on their own, and muffled whispers in empty rooms. A few days later, Andreas himself reported hearing footsteps in the attic. He searched with a lantern, but found nothing. No one had broken in. Still, he was uneasy. More odd things followed. Strange footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the house, but not away. The family noticed small items missing, papers disturbed, tools moved. Then, on March 31st, the new maid arrived. That night, the household fell silent forever. Days passed before anyone noticed the farm was eerily still. The postman realized the mail hadn't been collected. Neighbors became concerned. On April 4th, they entered the property, and what they found shocked them. In the barn, hidden under hay, lay the bodies of Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and one of the children. Each had been brutally bludgeoned to death, their faces unrecognizable. Inside the house, they found the maid and the other child, also murdered. The most chilling detail: forensic examiners determined that the killer stayed in the house for days after the murders. Meals had been eaten, livestock fed, fires lit. Whoever it was had made themselves at home among the dead. Investigators questioned villagers, but no one had seen anything. The killer left no footprints leading away. The Grubers had no known enemies, no sign of robbery. Suspicion fell on Victoria's rumored lover, a local man, but nothing could be proven. As the case unfolded, more sinister theories emerged. Some claimed the murders were ritualistic. Others whispered that the Grubers were cursed. But the most chilling rumor came from locals who believed the killer was already inside the house, perhaps living in the attic for weeks, watching, waiting. To this day, no one knows who committed the Hinterkaifeck murders. Despite multiple investigations, forensic examinations, and new leads, even decades later, the case remains one of Germany's most infamous unsolved crimes. Visitors to the site, now just a memorial in a quiet field, say they feel an oppressive presence. Some report hearing footsteps on the wind, like someone still pacing the attic. The farm is gone, but the darkness lingers. Proof that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not ghosts or demons, but people who slip silently into our lives, watching from the shadows, waiting to strike. In August 1977, single mother Peggy Hodgson lived in a modest council house in Enfield, North London, with her 4 children: Margaret, 13, Janet, 11, Johnny, 10, and Billy, 7. Their lives were ordinary until the night everything changed. It started with small things. Peggy heard shuffling in the hallway, then a loud crash. She rushed to her daughter's room and found a chest of drawers moving on its own, scraping across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. She tried to push it back, but it resisted, then slid forward again. It was as if something was trying to trap us in the room, she later said. Soon, the activity escalated. Knocking sounds echoed through the walls. Furniture flipped over, toys flew across rooms. The children screamed that voices were whispering in the dark. Neighbors came over, witnessing objects levitating and hearing strange bangs. Everyone was terrified. Desperate, Peggy called the police. Officers arrived, skeptical, until one of them saw a chair lift off the floor and slide across the room with no one near it. The officers signed a sworn statement, but admitted, "I don't know how to explain what I saw." Word spread quickly. The Daily Mirror newspapers sent reporters who were also stunned by what they saw. Soon, paranormal investigators from the Society for Psychical Research arrived, most notably Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair. Gross recorded hundreds of hours of audio in the house, documenting over 2,000 incidents of strange activity over the next 2 years. The most disturbing phenomenon centered around Janet, the 11-year-old daughter. She was often thrown from her bed, dragged across rooms, and seemed to be the focus of whatever was haunting the house. Investigators captured her speaking in a deep, gravelly voice, nothing like her own, claiming to be the spirit of a man named Bill, who had died in the house years earlier. On one tape, the voice says, "Just before I died, I went blind. Then I had a hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died on a chair in the corner downstairs." Later, researchers confirmed that a man named Bill Wilkins had indeed died in that very house, in the manner described. His son corroborated the details, stunned that the family could have known. Skeptics accused Janet of faking the voice. But voice experts analyzed the recordings and found that for her to produce such a sound, she would have had to use her vocal cords in a way impossible for a child her age without permanent damage. She spoke in that voice for hours, even while drinking water and with her mouth closed. Photos taken by investigators showed Janet seemingly levitating, though critics claimed she was jumping off her bed. Janet herself admitted that she and her siblings occasionally faked small events to test the researchers, but insisted that the vast majority of the phenomena were real. "It was not fun. It was terrifying," she said years later. The haunting eventually subsided around 1979. The family remained in the house, and while things quieted down, occasional activity still occurred. Peggy Hodgson lived there until her death in 2003. Janet moved away, trying to live a normal life, though she remained deeply affected. Maurice Gross and Guy Playfair stood by their belief that the events in Enfield were genuine. Even some skeptics conceded that certain phenomena, especially the recorded voices and the corroborated information about Bill Wilkins, defied easy explanation. The Enfield poltergeist became one of the most documented hauntings in history. It inspired books, documentaries, and even the 2016 film The Conjuring 2. Yet, despite the attention, the case remains unsolved. Was it a hoax by frightened children? A psychological manifestation of trauma? Or truly something supernatural, something that spoke through a child, moved furniture with unseen force, and tormented a family for years? Whatever it was, the events in that small council house in Enfield continue to haunt those who were there. As Janet once said, "I know what happened, and I'll never forget it. It lived with us." On January 2nd, 1935, a man checked into the President Hotel in Kansas City under the name Roland T. Owen. He carried no luggage except for a comb and a toothbrush, and he asked for a small interior room, 1046. The staff immediately sensed something was wrong. Owen was tall, broad-shouldered, and seemed nervous, as if someone might be following him. He kept the blinds drawn, the lights dim, and spent long hours sitting silently. Over the next 2 days, his behavior unsettled employees. The maid said he wouldn't let her open the curtains. The phone rang often, and Owen spoke in low, urgent tones. Once she overheard him mutter, "No, Don, I don't want to eat. I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to stay here." On the night of January 3rd, a guest complained of loud voices from 1046, to men arguing, furniture scraping, and heavy thuds. Yet when staff checked, the hallway was silent. The next morning, the switchboard noticed Owen's phone was off the hook. A bellboy went up. When he knocked, a weak voice called out, "Come in." But the door was locked from the inside. After several tries, the bellboy entered with a passkey and froze. Owen was kneeling on the floor, naked and drenched in blood. His skull was caved in, his wrists and ankles bound with cord, stab wounds piercing his chest. The walls and sheets were smeared red, as if he had staggered through the room in agony. Still alive, Owen whispered that nobody had hurt him, claiming he had fallen against the bathtub. Within hours at the hospital, he was dead. The investigation only deepened the mystery. Roland T. Owen didn't exist. The name was false. Fingerprints revealed nothing. For months, the body went unidentified until a woman finally recognized him as Artemis Ogletree, a 17-year-old from Birmingham, Alabama. Even then, the strangeness grew. Months after his death, Ogletree's mother received typed letters, supposedly from her son, written in a style that didn't sound like him. Later, she received a phone call from a man insisting Artemis was alive and living overseas. Police determined someone was impersonating him. Who was Don, the man Owen seemed afraid of? Why had Ogletree traveled hundreds of miles under an alias with no luggage? Who kept sending letters after he was dead? The case remains unsolved. Some believe he was lured into a trap by organized crime or a secret lover. Others think his killer stayed hidden in the hotel, slipping away unseen. Room 1046 no longer exists. The floor was renovated, but staff and guests whisper of strange chills, footsteps, and faint knocking in its hallway. Nearly a century later, the mystery of the boy in room 1046 lingers, one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. A young man checked in under a false name and never checked out. His killer and their reasons remain shadows, leaving only blood and unanswered questions.